In the news tonight, an agreement on safe zones in Syria comes into force at midnight, but Russia's defense ministry says it will continue striking Daesh elsewhere in the country. Iraqi forces advance further into Mosul from the north on the second day of a new push to speed up the nearly 7-month attempt to dislodge Daesh terrorists. And French centrist presidential candidate Emmanuel Macron extends his lead in the polls over his far-right rival Marine Le Pen on the final day of a tumultuous election campaign. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details, and we begin with local news where Rakan Saide was officially announced Jordan Press Association president after securing the majority of votes in the elections that were held at the Royal Cultural Centre today. Saide secured 513 votes compared with 130 for his closest rival, Majid Al-Amir. Turnout for the polls was high, with 890 out of the 1,045 eligible members casting their ballots. 5 candidates competed for the position of JPA president, 4 vice president, and 30 for JPA council membership. A consensus was adopted for UNESCO's final resolution, reaffirming the importance of the Old City of Jerusalem for the 3 monotheistic religions. The Executive Board of UNESCO ratified today a resolution that identifies Israel as the occupying power in Jerusalem and calls on it to rescind any move changing the city's character and status. The text said such moves were null and void and must be rescinded forthwith. On Tuesday, member states voted in favor of the resolution, which is renewed periodically with 22 votes for, 10 against, and 23 abstentions. The Palestinian deputy ambassador to UNESCO said the consensus on the resolution meant Israel had no right to make changes in Jerusalem.
It is clearly recalled to Israel its legal status in East Jerusalem, which is the occupying power. And following this status, it has no right to conduct any work, excavation, or any other changes in the city.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is encouraged by the agreement today in Astana, Kazakhstan, by guarantor countries Iran, Russia and Turkey to de-escalate violence in key areas in Syria. The UN chief stressed in a statement that it would be crucial to see this agreement actually improve the lives of Syrians. Russia's defense ministry said the agreement on de-escalation zones in Syria will come into force from midnight tonight, but added that Russia's air force will continue striking Daesh terrorists elsewhere in the country. The first and the largest de-escalation zones in northern Syria will include the Idlib province and adjoining districts of Latakia, Aleppo and Hama, with a total population of over 1 million. The zones appear intended to halt conflict in specific areas between Syrian government forces and rebels and would potentially be policed by foreign troops. Rebels rejected the deal and said they would not recognize Iran as a guarantor of any ceasefire plan. But the Russian deputy defense minister said the fact that the de-escalation agreement was supported by the United Nations, the United States and Saudi Arabia guarantees its implementation.
I want to stress that signing of the memorandum on the creation of de-escalation zones in the Syrian Arab Republic does not mean we will stop fighting Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra terrorists in Syria. The guarantor countries will take all necessary measures to continue fighting units of these terror organizations in the de-escalation zones, as well as support the government troops and armed opposition in fighting militants in other Syrian regions.
Iraqi special forces and police fought Daesh terrorists while edging closer to the Al-Nouri mosque in western Mosul. The close quarters fighting is focused on the mosque area where members of the group are besieged. Residents who were able to flee said the terrorists are hiding among them and using the alleyways, traditional family homes and snaking narrow roads to their advantage. But still, Tens of thousands of Mosul residents remain trapped inside homes, caught in the fighting, shelling and airstrikes as Iraqi forces backed by a US-led coalition advance in the west. The United Nations believes up to 500,000 people remain in the area, 400,000 of whom are with little food, water and medicine. A spokesman for the Joint Operations Command said the terrorists didn't have time to make barriers and that the advance has been good.
Islamic State is dying now. It is breathing its last breaths. Only a few neighbourhoods on the right side remain, and God willing, we will announce news of victories and the full liberation and clearing of the remaining part of the right side of Mosul.
Algeria's ruling National Liberation Front party and its main allies won a majority in a parliamentary election, overshadowed by the financial crunch from lower oil prices and questions over President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's health. Turnout in yesterday's vote was only 38.25%, lower than the 43% turnout in the last election in 2012. The FLN won 164 seats in the 462-seat National Assembly, but it lost considerable ground from the election 5 years ago when it won 221 seats.
The National Liberation Front won 164 seats, of which 50 are women. The National Rally for Democracy won 97 seats, 32 seats for women. The Peace Society Movement Alliance, 33 seats, including 6 for women.
And to the French elections, where centrist French presidential candidate Emmanuel Macron extended his lead in the polls over his far-right rival Marine Le Pen, the final day of a tumultuous election campaign that has turned the country's politics upside down. And just 2 days away from the French presidential election final runoff between Macron and Le Pen, Parisian voters still expressed high levels of dissatisfaction. A survey from the Bertelsmann Foundation published today showed widespread dissatisfaction with the direction of policy in the country. The poll shows French voters are among the most polarized in the European Union, with 1 in 5 describing themselves as extreme and only about a third as centrist. While several Parisians said they were generally fearful of Le Pen becoming president, some said they were not totally convinced by either Le Pen or Macron. Le Pen and Macron face each other on Sunday, with polls showing Macron likely to defeat Le Pen by a margin of roughly 62 to 38%. U.S. President Donald Trump returned to his hometown of New York for the first time since taking office, as many local residents took to the streets to protest the politics of the man who built his name and fortune in the city. Trump's trip was to meet with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull aboard the decommissioned aircraft carrier Intrepid. Demonstrators rallied and marched near the Intrepid, banging pans and chanting "Not my president" as they carried signs. The demonstrations were reminiscent of the weeks after Trump's November 8 election, when frequent protests took place outside his home in the Fifth Avenue tower that bears his name. Later on, Trump and Turnbull attended a gala dinner, during which Trump took the opportunity to set the record straight on the infamous phone call between the two leaders in February.
The opening salvo in a battle which changes name.
And, you know, they said we had a rough phone call. We really didn't have a rough phone call, did we? Everyone's talking about this phone call. The media was saying, what do you think about the phone call? You didn't really hang up. No, we had actually a very nice call, right? Good. Now the record is straight. All of those people back there. Thank goodness. It's true. We had a very nice phone call. A little testy. Got a little bit testy, but that's okay. We've had a very good relationship, and I'm very proud of the relationship. Thank you very much, Malcolm.
In a bid to highlight the rich cultures of many refugees' home countries, a group of refugee musicians in Belgium came together to make a unique album that blends their homeland's musical styles together. The Refugees for Refugees project is run by musicologist Tristan Drissens on behalf of Belgian music school Musique Publique and aims to raise money for refugees with an album and a series of concerts. With artists coming from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan and Tibet, all based in Belgium and all refugees. The project presented the participating musicians with the challenge of making their music fit with their colleagues' different styles. The 10-musician group will embark on a tour with concerts in Switzerland on June 24th and France on July 16 before returning to Belgium for more concerts. Thousands of people in Los Angeles enjoyed a free outdoor feast made entirely of food that would have gone to waste. Volunteers served up a traditional Mexican stew made with over 500 kilograms of mushrooms, leafy green vegetables, tomatoes and chilies. Much of the food used would have been thrown away for being slightly less than perfect or too old to be sold to supermarkets. The feast was prepared and cooked at LA Kitchen, a non-profit organization that provides culinary training for people in the community. Hundreds of volunteers danced along to a DJ-provided soundtrack while chopping the vegetables alongside trainees at the kitchen.
I think 10 years ago, people thought of food waste as bin diving. Now they recognise that we're talking about perfectly fresh, delicious food that is wasted on farms. And I think blaming consumers is an easy sort of way out for supermarkets, saying, oh, consumers don't want it. They do. There's a growing worldwide movement and a growing US movement against food waste, and consumers are demanding ugly fruits and vegetables in stores. They want to know what companies are doing to lead the efforts.
Real Madrid coach Zinedine Zidane said his job as Real Madrid coach depends on results, and therefore he will continue the fight for La Liga title no matter how easy the next rival might seem. Real are aiming to remain in pole position for a first La Liga title in 5 years. They face Granada tomorrow and have their crucial appointment with Atletico Madrid next week, when they expect to get the ticket for the Champions League final in Cardiff on June 6th. World number 2 Novak Djokovic has parted company with his coaching team in a bid to halt a run of poor results which culminated in a quarter-final exit at the Monte Carlo Masters last month. He announced today that he would part ways with his coach, his fitness coach and physiotherapist. A winner of 12 Grand Slam titles, the Serb has suffered a noticeable dip in form since winning his maiden French Open last June. He made a shock second-round exit at the Australian Open, followed by successive defeats in Acapulco and Indian Wells before being beaten in Monte Carlo. Djokovic said he would take his time before naming a new head coach. And finally, a quick look at the weather. Chilly conditions prevail in hilly areas for the rest of tonight and fair in the Badia and the Jordan Valley with northwesterly light winds. Tomorrow, moderate weather is in the forecast in the hilly areas with a high of 26 degrees Celsius in Amman, while it will be relatively hot in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea. And the Gulf of Aqaba should expect a fair night and a hot day tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Here now is the temperatures forecast for tonight. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. An agreement on safe zones in Syria comes into force at midnight, but Russia's defense ministry says it will continue striking Daesh elsewhere in the country. Iraqi forces advance further into Mosul from the north on the second day of a new push to speed up the nearly 7-month attempt to dislodge Daesh terrorists. And French centrist presidential candidate Emmanuel Macron extends his lead in the polls over his far-right rival Marine Le Pen on the final day of a tumultuous election campaign. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Aliyah Khan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.